Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of We Hunt Together. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love that whole situation where Lola's buying traps and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, so this will make it, what happened to it is like, oh, they'll get fried. And Lola's like, wait, they'll get fried? She's like, at least it'll be painless, right? And the ladies at the store, the cash register is kind of like, eh? And she's almost like, what do you mean, eh? She's like, fine. Because, like, Jackson's still telling her, it's like, no, get a cat. It's the more humane way. She's like, how is that more humane? Why would I get a cat? You get a cat because you want to get a cat. You don't get a cat just to kill mice. The fact of the matter is, it's more effed up to get a cat because I'm just getting, you want me, at least with a trap, it's a one and done. It's just kind of like, you're trapped, you're dead. The fact of the matter is, you get a cat, the cat chases after the mouse, and then, then you get eaten. And he's like, fair point. And the lady at the cash register is almost looking like, what the fuck was I even listening to? Which, maybe that, I didn't even think about it while watching the episode. Obviously, once again, this is a cat and mouse situation. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's a giant, maybe that's what they're setting up that whole thing to be. The whole mouse, Lola and the whole mouse thing is a giant metaphor for the whole cat mouse thing with her and Jackson versus Baba and Freddie. Maybe that's what that whole situation is supposed to be. I don't know. Because I'm skipping around, but I thought it was so interesting because, she ends up killing a rat later on in the episode, but then she gets pissed because she finds out, she was like, oh, she felt so heartbroken about it, and then she finds out, oh, wait, the rat shit in my cereal, so it's like, because it's like, I felt sad at first, and then, she's like, and then I found out there was rat shit in my cereal, so I ordered 10 more traps. So it's like, because it also showed you, I think it's a little insight into who Lola is too, you kind of get under her skin, she goes hard. Because I think we've seen instances throughout the episode where she kind of lets her, because I think that's the interesting parallel, because Jackson tries to keep calm all the time. Lola's a little more open about her feelings. Like when she's frustrated and pissed, she lets it show. I think that's probably healthier than what Jackson does, because Jackson has his moments of he has so much pent up rage that the smallest thing set him off. Once again, like I brought up last episode, I kind of find I can empathize with Jackson because I feel like I'm kind of that person sometimes too. But that's why I feel like Lola at least has the healthier thing because she just kind of gets it all out. Maybe not. Who knows? I just think that's kind of this episode was a really good insight. Once again, into more about Freddie and Baba, but also into just Lola and Jackson, because I love a lot of their rapport. They're back and forth throughout the episode. I really like, because it's at first it was it's we also found out they don't like peanut butter, and he's like, yeah, I think it's weird because I don't like peanut butter considering the fact is I love Snickers, and she had a smile on her face. That was one of the few instances we've seen her kind of smile, and it was just oh, he didn't get to see that, but we as the audience did. I thought that was interesting. But even that moment of him being like, all right, I'll see you tomorrow, she's almost like, wait, what? No, we got some clues. Okay, you want? Sure, go ahead. He's like, oh, make sure you go home after this. Lola's like, sure. We see later on she doesn't end up going home, but I thought that was such a fascinating aspect. And the whole thing where he's like, oh yeah, me and my son, we made you banana bread. She's like, for me? He's like, yeah, I thought we could eat it together in the car. And she's like, she was basically like, that's a big fucking no. She's like, thank you. But he's like, oh, do you think it's because it's going to crumble? I mean, it's actually deliciously moist. She's like, do not ever say the phrase deliciously moist in front of me again. And he's like, okay, I love that. I always think that's so interesting. That's only something I've come to learn more as I've gotten older, that some people don't like the word moist. I don't get it. I've never had an aversion to a word, I have certain sounds, I am one of those people that hates the sound of nails on a chalkboard. I'm sure a lot of people do, but just it does something to you. I get that reaction, but it's I've never had that reaction to a word like moist. It'd be interesting if that ended up setting someone off who's listening to this. Stop saying the M word. It's interesting. I've never understood that, but I understand the sensation of what it's like for people, but I just don't understand the feeling of that word in particular, a word in general, doing them. Regardless, I just thought that was interesting. This episode also brought up an interesting insight into Lola, where we learned that basically it seems like she has a history of drugs. I don't know if this is something like this most recent situation kind of sparked that, because she was writing a note saying, "Hi, Jessica, happy birthday." So my mind is immediately like, okay, so we talking an ex type of situation, we talking a daughter situation, like maybe she has a daughter that she lost custody of, because it seemed like it was going to be like a, because I was wondering, because I was thinking like if it was someone that like is no longer around, it could just be a thing of like, oh, writing this every so often, but it seemed like it was something she was writing with the purpose of sending it. I could be wrong, but that's why I'm just kind of like, I'm wondering what that's all about. But I think that probably the anniversary, whatever that situation may be, it's interesting because it's like, oh, that person's birthday, and then it's like Jackson and his wife's anniversary at the same time. But it seemed like writing that note is what kind of set her off. But she's putting eye drops in and everything in the morning. I thought was kind of fascinating. But circling back to it, obviously, like Freddie at the call center having to to justify her situation with Reggie. It's like, yeah, he just wants to call, talk a little bit. He's lonely. He'd rather just talk for 23 minutes and doesn't even want to talk about my tits. Has anyone else had long calls like that today, Larry? I don't think so. So can I get back to doing my job? So that's an interesting thing. He even suggests like, oh, you could actually make more money if you go to the webcam, like upstairs, do the webcam stuff, because you have such a pretty face. So I'm curious to like, part of my brain is like, is she going to eventually like aim to kill her boss? Like, is it going to eventually turn into a thing of like, because now it does seem like it is a thing of like, skipping around a little bit. It's like, oh, so this is all super personal you at first. It's like literally like, get rid of Simon, personal issue. Matt, personal issue. We'll kind of circle around to it, but I thought it was interesting, like her, checking on Baba, and it's like, oh, they hook up. It's like, it's like, oh man, we totally murdered a dude a couple days ago. Nah, who cares about it? But then eventually it does seem like it does wear on Baba, because I thought it was interesting, because for her, she tries to justify it by being like, we kind of had no choice, and then you just have that look on Baba's face, like it's like he halfway believes her. Like it's part of it. He's like, yeah, maybe we didn't. Or maybe we did have a choice and we just chose to go down this shitty human route of just like in a sense of being a shitty human being and going down the route of just killing him. Obviously, like Freddie has her encounter with Matt, and I was like, "Oh, that's not good." I was like, so immediately my brain was like, "Oh, Matt's going to get it next." I was like, "So how's she going to spin this to get Baba to go after him?" It's like, no, she actually gets the cop like the moment they show up and everything, because she was even saying like, "Oh, like this sensation of the fact of the matter is they might come after us." She's like, "Oh, that expecting that knock at the door, blah blah blah." Like she's like, she gets a thrill from it, because we got a little insight into her life, like when she was younger, like her dad was dropping her off at kind of like almost like a boarding house type of situation, and his literal words were, "Try not to be yourself, at least on the first day," which is kind of effed up to say, but once again it plays into the fact is, this heavily hints to the fact is Freddie not the most stable human being. Like there's something wrong with Freddie on some level. I mean, maybe that's what kind of brings her and Baba together, that in a sense that maybe they are both broken and they found each other, so it's kind of like we're two broken individuals in this crazy world type of situation. But regardless, like the way her dad was talking like that made it seem like, oh, like there's some issues there is kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm curious what it was, because we got like a tiny insight, not that much of an insight, but I thought that was kind of interesting in the long run. But like obviously like Jackson and Lola show up, and obviously they talk to, and I'm surprised they didn't catch on to it, because if you notice there's 2 cups out already. They didn't say anything about it. I guess they didn't really notice it. Maybe that'll be a clue they come back, because it's like I'm not no expert in this, but I'm like, that's typically a sign you pick up on in a crime drama. It's like, oh, did you notice that there were 2 cups? Did she just have them out? It's almost like one was for somebody else, that because they were already out. It's not like she had to go get the cups. It's like, no, she was already using the cups that were already there. But it's interesting because Jackson kind of has his perspective, like how he handles it. He's like, oh, just like casually talking to her and stuff like that, and Freddie's just cool, calm, and just like the way she's talking to them and everything. And even him immediately picking up on he's like, oh, your name. It's like Zarathustra. He's like, do most people get the reference? She's like, no. Because she was actually smiling, because it seemed like she found Jackson interesting because he got the reference. Now this is going to turn into an interesting thing. What if we eventually get to the point like she enjoys this cat and mouse game so much that she actually starts taking a little bit more interest in Jackson than Baba? Baba's someone that she can manipulate, but she's looking at Jackson like, oh shit, you're smart. You are one of the few men that has ever gotten that thing. And he's like, and he starts dissecting it, being like, oh, so you kind of get off on being more intelligent. It's like, yeah. And it's just like, oh, do you think you're smarter than us? She's like, probably. And he's like, oh, because she's like, you could be book smart, but I mean, you can study and learn all this stuff and be able to recite it bad, but it's like, that doesn't necessarily mean you're smart, you know? So it's just like, and then eventually she got to the whole thing. I'm curious though, like, why are you here? Oh my God, Simon. Oh my God, that's so crazy. I only met him, last week. I just saw him last week. Oh man, that's crazy. You know what? There was something at the club the moment she was like, saying that, I was like, okay, so you're going to throw Matt into the fire. 2 birds, 1 stone. You owe him money, and if you get the police involved, 2 birds with 1 stone. I mean, to be fair, that could, I still didn't think that all the way through, because I'm like, even if he gets arrested, that's not clear cut against him. And even then, it's a situation of, well, he could always talk about your involvement in everything, because he saw you with Simon and everything, you know, so there's that. You know, the way, and I think it's interesting too that Baba doesn't ask any questions, because he's like, well, he brings up like, who's this guy you're pointing the cops to? It's like, well, it's Matt. Like, obviously I came here with very little money, got a loan from Matt, but then he started putting more interest on it, so now I kind of owe him, and that's why this whole dating site situation thing. But it's like, she left out, so, because even I thought it was interesting, and Baba didn't take much notice of it. It's like, you didn't say anything about the fact is that she only brought this up now. She's been with you, like, she already ran into Matt before you two shagged the night before, and she didn't say diddly squat, you know? So that's why I'm like, why you catch up on it? But it's like, Baba's like, you know, I guess he's not, you know, who cares about the situation? I mean, we got bigger things to worry about, the cops and everything. So it's like, all right, let's get to Matt before the cops do. They go to the club and they talk to the dude Andy, and I love that Lola's almost like, are you taking are you having a fucking like laugh or taking a fucking piss or something like that, which I love that, like, British slang. Are you having a laugh? Like, I like that. I don't know why, because it's such a unique phrasing that I like that. Are you having a fucking laugh? Are you taking a fucking piss? Like, that's all is interesting phrasing. And I love Jackson be like, oh, do me a solid, because she's getting all heated and stuff like that. I even love when you look at her in the background after Jackson turns and looks at her, she opens up her coat shrugging like, what the hell? And he's like, you know, sometimes anger isn't a necessary thing in certain situations. And he's like, except, you know, this is one of those situations. And she's like, now? And he's like, this is one of those accurate situations. She's like, good. And she's like, what's the whole thing? And she's almost like, and who says, do me a solid? So I just thought that was interesting, because obviously she's trying, you know, but regardless, the fact is that Freddie's trying to be like, oh, Matt, like, oh, like, it made it seem like, oh, him and Simon and Matt kind of knew each other. It was interesting. I was like, look at you, like, spinning this web of lies so effortlessly. I butchered that. Jesus, sorry. But what's also interesting is we got more insight into Baba. Well, for one, we saw earlier in the episode he has scars on his back, and I thought that was an interesting conversation about, well, the fact of the matter is, maybe I am dead. Maybe I'm just a figment of your imagination. She's like, if you were a figment, why do you feel so warm? But regardless, she's like trying to make him feel better by being like, everything you ever did, you were a kid. But he's like, yeah, but it doesn't justify anything, like, regardless of it, because he talks about the fact is him and a friend were basically made a bet over the little bit of coke they had left. It's like, the winner who kills the most people gets the coke. So it turned into a thing of they killed 17 people, and then she says a line of who won. And he immediately almost looks like, what? You're not shocked or being like, oh my God, that's crazy. It's like, oh, but who won? And then he's like, it was a draw. And she's like, oh, okay. He's like, you seem disappointed. She's like, no one likes a draw. And it's just like I said, it seems like Baba is seeing the cracks. It's not like she's even hiding it. Like, he's like, oh, you're just definitely not a normal person either. But I guess because he's not normal, he's okay with it, because it's like, once again, I'm broken and messed up in my own way, so are you. So maybe that's why I'm okay with it. Maybe he's kind of looking past the thing. That's why it just seems like she's so more manipulative in that regard because of that. But it's like, I mean, granted, we don't know what, I mean, like, you know, Jackson kept bringing up last episode about, like, obviously, like, the person behind all this, you know, many things led them up to the whole Simon situation. It wasn't just kind of like, oh, it was just all it was. It's like, no, like, little small things built up and created that aftermath. So it's like, you know, the same thing could be said in Freddie's case. Like, it took multiple things in her past to lead her up to be who she is right now, made her into who she is. Like, basically, you are your experience. Your experiences in totality forge you into the person that you are, you know? For better or for worse in many different regards. But, it's like, oh, like, technically, and he talks about, he's like, technically I won because one of the women I killed was pregnant, so it's like 17 and a half. Pascal was kind of like, not too, he didn't agree with it until, like, I hit him with the butt of my gun, and just the look on Freddy's face, just, like, so, like, desensitized to the story and everything. And it's like, and Baba talks about the fact is, and then, yes, the next day we just laughed about it. And it's just, and, you know, because they had played, like, football, in the garden of, like, the dead and stuff like that. And it's just like, she's so, like, doesn't really react to it too much, but then she tries to make it better by using the comparison of, like, you know, if a parent leaves a kid and a baby in a tub and the baby drowns, like, is that on the fault of the kid? No, it's on the fault of the parent who left them alone. But then Baba responds by being like, what if the parent comes back and the kid is holding the baby under, drowning the baby themselves with their own hands? It's like, who's at fault then? The parent, you know? So I thought that was such an interesting countermeasure to what she was saying. And I think maybe that speaks volumes about their experiences. The fact is that she's like, the parent, like, she wants to blame the parent that left them alone and stuff like that. But he's like, but the parent came back. But the kid was so messed up that the kid is killing the baby. Like, I think, once again, I think that's a reflection of their experiences and who they are, and, like, how he looks back on his experiences and how she looks versus how she looks back on hers. It's so, I think it's fascinating in a grand scheme of things, you know. So I thought that was, you know, an interesting element to it all. I actually want to circle back around. I thought it was interesting, like, after Jackson and Lola left Freddie's place, I thought it was interesting that he was talking, because he immediately is like, yeah, something's not right about that lady, just, it seems manipulative, like, she thinks she's, it's like, even using, you know, Zara Thursday, and I love Lola being like, oh yeah, you know, he's like, well, what do you make of it? She's like, I mean, just like, yeah, it's like, I mean, she's like, what do you make of it? I'm like, I love that, because it's such a thing of, like, you could have admitted that you didn't understand the reference either, like, you didn't get it, but I guess for her, she just felt weird about admitting that she didn't get the reference. So I thought that was fascinating in the long run. But obviously they, like I said, they had gotten the surveillance tape and they saw, like, the Matt and Simon situation. It's like, okay, so sadly they didn't get to Matt in time. Probably, like, if, you know, well, because it took a while before they got Matt's name, so it wouldn't have mattered. And I thought it was kind of interesting because, like, when Jackson got back to work, he was like, oh, hey. And she's like, oh, kind of like surprised he was there. And he was saying a line where he's like, I want you to know, I hope you don't think I don't care. He's like, because I do. At first I was like, do you mean about her? But then I was like, oh no, because like, obviously the whole conversation last episode was kind of about, like, his happy disposition, and it's like, we're here solving a murder. And so for him, it's like, I don't want you to think just because I went home, spent time with my family and stuff like that, I don't care about this case, that it doesn't matter. I do care, you know? And she's like, no, I know, I understand, you know? But then, like, I was curious to see how they were going to handle the whole the whole Matt situation. And it's like, bring him into your car, and then you have Baba choke him out. And then it's like, oh, we're going to stage a suicide. Literally in the middle of them staging is some dude that was, like, drunk there, walks there. Baba chases after him and everything. And the moment, like, you know, Freddy's there calling, Baba was like, oh, Matt's still alive, isn't he? He grabs her shoe, and she's like, she turns around, she's like, Matt? But then, like, Baba shows up and finishes him off. And I was like, that bastard was still alive. She's like, he came back from the dead. He's like, no, it's going to take more than, like, it's going to take like 5 minutes to strangle somebody. He's like, I only did it enough to make him pass out so that it'd be easier to do this, because he needs to die from this to kind of solidify their story. The whole point was to get a log so it could look like, you know, he stood up to do everything. But now it's like, well, Baba didn't have to kill the other dude. The dude ran and just kind of ended up his head on a log or something, or hit his head on a rock or whatever. And so he ended up dying like that, it seems like. So it's like, okay. So now it's the situation. And even like Freddy leaving the message, I'm sorry, Simon, you know, granted, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter, because, you know, they like, oh, the coincidence of, like, hey, Freddy pointed us towards Matt. Matt literally kills himself the next day. Little suspicious. So they're not buying into it. But obviously their boss is kind of like, she's like, I like things being wrapped up in a nice little bow. Basically gives them 24 hours. And I love that Lola's kind of blowing up, being like, really, 24 hours? That's really all she's going to give us? You know, But, looking through the surveillance tapes, Lola pieces together like, no, they definitely, Matt and Freddie know each other. It's not Simon, because it started looking like maybe it's like a thing of like, oh, Simon was in a relationship with Matt. There's a dude that he was with like that was like whispering to him like after he had punched Simon, that like there was a dude that was kind of whispering to him. That's the same dude that was with him later on. So I don't know if like that's his business partner. I was thinking like, oh, is that your significant other? Turn up, maybe it isn't. I don't know. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not just Matt with this whole thing. Like there's other people, that dude, but maybe someone else as well. Like it seems like it's not just like a one-off. It seems like there might be a group that maybe Freddie isn't aware of, that it isn't just Matt. He did say like, oh, us, like almost like a thing of like there's a group of us that would be coming after you, multiple people, not just him. But regardless, this does point them towards Freddie now, because it's like, oh, like she's been manipulating us since the beginning. Granted, Jackson already kind of had a feeling, but now it's a thing of like, nah, they had 3 interactions, Matt and Freddie, in the club, and so it's like the third one is where things kind of got heated, and eventually Simon got involved, and that led to everything, so it's definitely going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us. I am very, very interested to see where things kind of go on the Lola front, like what her situation is, who Jessica is. Obviously, learning bits more and more about Baba's past as well as Freddie's, because I feel like hers is like the most of an enigma. Because at least in the case of Baba, like it was kind of what I thought it was. It seemed like it might not even be necessarily a child soldier type of situation. It just might be the world he lived in and the country he grew up in. Of just kind of like, it's kind of kill or be killed type of, survival of the fittest type of thing. So you did whatever you need to do, and that kind of molded you into a bit of a monster, type of situation. So we'll kind of have to look on that front. But I'm also interested to find out more about Jackson, especially the way he's been presented so far in the show, like where that kind of takes him. Because there's even this little moment where he was just kind of like, you reneged, and his son is like, shut up, dad, shut up. And he's like, you shut up. And he was like, sorry. And just like, because I think he realized like, nah, that's kind of messed up for me to yell at my kid. Regardless, I just thought that was all fascinating. So like I said, I am so curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.